had a lot of really nice times already. I feel just so blessed. Wish I could be at Oklahoma camp meeting with you every year. I think this is just such a great camp meeting. Plus, I like to go bird watching. Some of you know some of my former students here too. But if you saw me wandering around campus with binoculars, I was looking for the birds, and I was especially excited to see a summer tanager. And then last night we saw a painted, that's it, painted bunting. And boy, they're just so beautiful. What beautiful nature we have all around us, don't you think? So what a blessing. And I am passing around here. This is my shameless plug here. You know, if you want to follow us on social media, here's our QR codes. Check that out. So we post updates of different fun things as we find historical items. But I want to tell you about this in particular. And I thank you for those of you that were helping me pass this out, these little cards. On the back is a little QR code that you can use your phone. And you can listen. It's been a lot of fun to create audio resources, media resources, because we especially want young people to get excited about our Adventist past, right? And so my wife, who I married up, and let me tell you, you know, and so I'm married to a historian. How you know? So I was just talking to some of my friends here. We have a lot of books in our home, okay? If you come over, we sure do. And so we love to read. Our kids love to read. The worst punishment that we could do for our kids was to take away reading privileges. Suddenly, that's when you know that you were really in a lot of trouble, is if mom and dad take the books away, which we never really had to do very often, but anyways. But this is her podcast. She just launched it like 2 months ago. And it's stories of Adventist women and their contributions, and both as pastors, evangelists, missionaries, medical doctors, you name it, all kinds of stuff. And you don't have to have on your phone. You can listen to it online on the website, on your computer or whatever. But I'm excited because it's very well done, well researched, and highly produced. And we hope it's going to inspire a new generation of young women in particular, but just to educate people. I had one young lady at General Conference session. She listened to the podcast, listened to 5 episodes nonstop. And she said, this changed my life. I want to go and serve the Lord. And that's what it's all about, is if they get excited about Jesus and wanting to share Jesus with others. And so tell your friends about it. That's our newest podcast in our podcast family of fun things that we're researching all the time and finding some of those stories. By the way, one of those stories, I think she has a whole episode or part of an episode on, is Minnie Sipe, one of the most indefatigable pastors, evangelists in all of Adventist history. And she started out her ministry here in Oklahoma. Did you know that? Right here in Oklahoma, northwest Oklahoma, as I recall. She wrote her autobiography. She never planned to be a pastor, but she was married to a farmer, and times went bad. All the people started moving away. The pastors moved away, and she started visiting the members in her community, having Bible studies with them. Before she knew it, she had raised up a church, and then she raised up a second church. And then she raised up a third church, and so then the conference said, you're doing better than any of our pastors, and sent her a paycheck. And she sent it back and said, well, you can't pay me, I'm a woman. And they said, oh, yes, we can. You're doing the Lord's work. And so she just faithfully served here in Oklahoma. That's one of many stories in our Adventist past, but one of the most amazing stories. Maybe I'll even throw a picture up of her tomorrow if you haven't heard of her story before, or just check out the podcast. So that's my little plug for the They Also Serve. By the way, one last thing, that podcast name comes from the first book highlighting the stories of women in Adventist history, titled They Also Served. Kind of cool. So check it out, and I hope that you enjoy that. Let's pray together. Let's pray together. Father God, we're just thankful for the privilege, the opportunity to be able to learn and to grow here at Camp Meeting, to learn more about you and how you've led in our church heritage. And so I pray that you would give us wisdom, help us to see your hand at work, help us to learn from the challenges along the way too, and that we will grow closer to you as a result. So bless our time in Jesus' name, amen. All right, just a fun story first, because I want to have a spiritual point that I bring out in some of my later stories that I'm going to tell you about. But how many of you have pets? How many of you have dogs? I have a real dog. I have a golden retriever. Okay, we're talking a big dog. Some people, we took our dog with us all the way to Asia, to the Philippines. They said, "Is that part horse?" And I said, "No, it's just a big dog." They'd never seen such a big dog before. And so I've always had a thing for big dogs. I grew up with retrievers when I was a kid. And one day when I was pastoring, long ago and far away, there was... my wife tried to call me. I was out doing some visitation or something, and I was busy, and I missed her phone call. And so I get home for supper, and then as I get home, I realized there's a voicemail message, and said, "Michael, I hope you don't mind. I talked to some friends of ours, and they have an emergency. They need us to watch their dog for us, so we're going to watch their dog for us this weekend." And I knew what dog it was, because it was, what do you call it, a wiener dog? Dachshund, yeah, that's right. A dachshund, like that up on the screen. And my goodness, I have a theory that the smaller the dog, the louder it barks. Have you noticed that too? It's like this Napoleon complex. And so this is what happened. And so I got home, and sure enough, already I heard, yep, 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 yep. And I thought, oh, no, what has my wife done? I love my wife, but my goodness, no, no, no. And so there was this little dog. So I thought, well, maybe I'll put it in the garage. And it yapped even louder. So then I put it in the backyard, and I put our big dog in the backyard, and it started feeling a little bit better, and I thought things were going pretty well. So after a little bit of time doing some other stuff at home, and all of a sudden I hear this yell from my wife, "Michael, come quick!" What could be the matter? And so then I ran to our back door, and I saw what had to be one of the funniest sights I've ever seen in my life, because there was a rabbit being chased by the wiener dog, being chased by our big dog, being chased by my wife. I wish I had had a phone with video, because I'm sure this would have been on America's Funniest Home Videos, right? And so there they are, and I'm just dying, like, this is hilarious. And then all of a sudden the rabbit went around the side of the house. There was kind of a fence. We lived kind of in a downtown area. There's kind of a fence, and it went around the side, and the rabbit jumped through a hole in the fence. I didn't even know there was a hole in the fence. Jumped through the hole in the fence. Then the wiener dog jumped through the hole in the fence. Of course, my big dog couldn't jump through the hole in the fence, and then, of course, my wife couldn't jump through the fence either. So she's, "Michael!" So I run to the front door, and I see the wiener dog, whose name is, you're not going to believe this, French Fry. I said, "French Fry, come back!" And that dog took off. There's a field across from our house, but we lived in the city, so I thought, man, for sure this dog is going to die. And so I started driving around my little pastor's car, a little Toyota Sentra, and I had my big dog sitting in the front seat. It's a hot summer day with the windows rolled down, and I'm calling out as I drive through the neighborhood, "Oh, French Fry! Oh, French Fry!" You should have seen the looks on people's faces. People looked at me. In fact, I'm pretty sure I passed a drug deal going down, and they looked at me, "Far out, man, I'm getting out of here." And so it's starting to get evening time, starting to get dark, and I'm driving around still, kind of like, "French Fry, where are you?" I went behind a pizza place, and the lady's taking out the trash, "French Fry!" And the lady screamed, "Ah!" and ran back inside, and then I'm still looking and panicked. My friend's dog, I mean, the pastor killed the dog. I mean, I could just see the story going around the church, you know, and so I eventually, you're not going to believe this, but I eventually found French Fry. You'll never guess where. No, in the drive-thru at Wendy's. It looked up like it was ordering. There it was, like it was ready to order. Like, you know, "Where's my French fries?" And so I see it, and the dog sees me, and it takes off. But thankfully, I called my wife, said, "Put some dog food outside." And that's a smart dog. And it would kind of come towards the thing, and I was about to trap it, like to push it in the garage, and it ran away and escaped. So I told Heidi, if there's any chance our friends have not left, call them, see. And she had, sure enough, not left yet. She had one final shift at the hospital and just got off late at night, and she got the message, and so before leaving town, came over to our house. And now we've been looking for hours. And all she did was drive up in our driveway, get out of her car, and I don't know where that dumb dog was. But all she had to do was say, "French fry, oh, French fry." And that rascal came out of wherever it was hiding. And it came and jumped up on her, licked her face. It was so happy. By the way, I fixed the hole in the fence. But oh, that we could hear the voice of Jesus, to hear our Master's voice. Isn't that what it's all about with missions? Isn't that why we're here? That's why we're here at Oklahoma Camp Meeting. That's why these people sacrificed their lives, and they did so much to make an impact, to make a difference. And people heard God's voice calling them to go and serve. And sometimes that's across the street, and other times, like some of the stories I'm going to tell you today, it could very well be to the very farthest ends of the planet. Some of our very first Adventist missionaries, this is kind of a really cool story, is the Boyd family. Charles Boyd and his wife, the two of them, Maud Sisley Boyd, the two of them will go as pioneer missionaries. They'll actually first go to the American South. This is before Edson White goes on the boat, the Morning Star. This is very early on, and they will begin to start breaking down racial barriers. In fact, I'm so impressed with some of our pioneers. They were abolitionists. They were working for equality. And the Boyd said, we don't like this idea of segregation of black and white in some of our churches. And they had read some of Ellen White's counsels. And you know what they did? They came up with a kind of a strategy. Instead of having a segregated church, they knew if they just integrated everybody together, so they came up with the L-shaped church so that nobody had to be behind somebody else. And so this was kind of a way, they were trying to find ways to break down racial prejudice. So they were in the American South, and then there's an opportunity, a call comes for them to go and be part of the very first group of Adventist missionaries that will go to Africa. Very interesting. In fact, I found in the archives a picture of their first home. You want to see what their home looked like? That's why we have fun in the archives. It's the best picture I have. I'm sorry it's not a little bit clearer, but you can see that she said after the first year, the roof was starting to cave in. But it was the best that they had, and it was the first outpost, the beginning of many. And so they're starting a small little printing, a little print shop. They're starting to work on literature, translating literature, distributing literature, having Bible work, and that kind of thing. But they have a passion. They see that there's an opportunity. It's not enough to go where foreigners are going to a place like in Cape Town. They want to go out and minister to the local tribes. If only somebody would give them land. And so at one point, Doris Robinson and Boyd and a few others, they'll go to the head magistrate and they will talk to him and say, if you will only give us we would really like to have a mission station. And they were just hoping that he would give them permission to sell the land. So he says, tell me what you want. And so he just stands there and listens as they rattle off a list of everything that they would like to have. And they're praying. And he said, okay, you need to go up to Bulawayo, to the magistrate up there, who's a sub-magistrate of his. And here is a letter. And he doesn't tell them what's in the letter. He just writes it out as he's talking to them, as they're talking to him. He writes out this letter and then signs and seals it and gives him this sealed envelope and says, take this to the magistrate there in Bulawayo and see what happens. So he gets all the way up to there, and so the magistrate that's there starts to meet with him, and he says, what would you like? And so they start telling him, we would like to have a mission station. We need some property. Here's all the things that we need to be able to start a mission here in Africa, what will eventually later be dubbed Salusi, by the way. way. And so they come, and so and he asked them, is there anything else that you need? And well, we don't know, what to ask for. And so finally he says, the letter says to give you everything that you want. No conditions. So ask for everything you want. And to their amazement, God had providentially worked in advance. They didn't even realize what was in that letter, but they received one of the prize tracts of land, what will become known as Seleucia. As I mentioned, here's them leaving from there. It's a picture of, they called them the oxen, a span of oxen, a couple spans of oxen, because they would have to go several days into the countryside to actually visit the new property that had been given to them. And they just felt it was God's divine intervention that had prompted them, first of all, to see the original magistrate, to go to the other magistrate, and through all of that God had intervened. And by about 10 years later, 1905, this is a picture of what the school actually looked like. I love the story of these missions. I just see God's hand at work again and again, his providence that just opens doors that just would have seemed impossible. In fact, after they opened the mission station, they actually had to go back home first. Okay, they check out the mission station, take some supplies there. They go back, and then they bring the full accoutrements of their family and other supplies, and have a much bigger supplies and everything else that takes them quite a bit longer, but they eventually get there. And by the time they arrive, that next year there will be a terrible famine. And so the missionaries are wondering what to do. What do we do? And so they start using their own food and start feeding the local people around them, who realize the missionaries are not there to take advantage of them. They're sacrificing. They're willing to go hungry with them, and they're trying to take care of them. And then that next year, war breaks out between some of the tribes and some of the anyways, it's a long, complicated story, but war breaks out, suffice it to say. And at that point, those local people that they had taken care of are now trying to protect them, said, you are in harm's way. You are in danger. Please come with us and flee. We will take you to somewhere that will be safe. And they take all the mission supplies and they hide them so that they can take care of their missionaries, because they had grown to love them so much. By the way, these early missionaries in Seleucia, they did have, shortly about after the famine and then the war, there was a huge outbreak of malaria. And so some of the missionaries said, well, if you read Ellen White's writing, she says you should not use any harmful drugs. And she lists off a whole bunch of harmful drugs from about 30 years before that she warned against. Maybe you're aware of this, the development of Adventist health reform. It took some time. It took a lot of effort to kind of figure out how that was going to go and take place, and understand how dress reform and health reform and all of that in a balanced way. And sometimes people went to extremes, and Ellen White had to kind of correct them a little bit and bring them back. So this was kind of a little bit of a struggle in our church heritage. And those early missionaries, they remembered Ellen White said, don't use any harmful drugs. And some people were prescribing quinine, which is very strong. Some of you maybe have taken quinine like me when I've traveled in malaria-infected regions of the world. I know some of you have been missionaries in some of those kinds of places too. I mean, and it's pretty strong. It's not meant for just anything, but it is one of the ways to cure, or to at least help you get better from malaria. And so the missionary said, what do we do? And so they quoted Ellen White, said, don't use any harmful drugs. And she mentions quinine. Do you take quinine or do you not take quinine? Ellen White says, I have a quote, I have a proof text that says not to use quinine. So some of those faithful missionaries who worked so hard, sacrificed everything, one by one they succumbed to malaria. But there was one young missionary couple by the name of W.H. Anderson. He and his wife, they were there. They were the rebels. They were dedicated, loved the Lord. Don't get me wrong. They're not like the rebels, like a rebel, but just they were like, maybe Ellen White didn't mean that when it came to malaria. So they went to town, bought some quinine when this malaria outbreak took place, and they survived and most of the missionaries are buried on that mission compound in Seleucia. Of course, Ellen White was still alive, and some of the other missionaries that survived from elsewhere heard about what happened. They said, those bad missionaries, they took the quinine, and so they tattletaled to Ellen White. Ellen White, Mrs. White, you're never going to believe this. Somebody didn't follow your counsels. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but they tattletaled to Ellen White. And so Ellen White checked with the medical doctors and said, well, that was 30 years ago. I wasn't writing about malaria. I was writing about people using harmful drugs for things that had nothing to do with malaria and that were just being harmful to people because they're being misprescribed. And they said, no, malaria, this is the best treatment for malaria. And she wrote back and said, send a message back to those missionaries where there's malaria. Make sure you use quinine. That was taking, and again, I'm paraphrasing. This is my soup notes here. I'm paraphrasing for you. But basically, she said, they're taking my writings out of context. So even missionaries, sometimes, even good-hearted, sacrificial, loving missionaries can sometimes make some mistakes. Kind of like the boat that sank the other day that I told you about as well. We have to learn the hard way. Anyways, moving on, but just so you could see, here's the cemetery in Seleucia. I've written actually encyclopedia articles, the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventism. If you love Adventist history, I hope you're following that. Right now there's about 4,300 articles, and it's about maybe two-thirds, maybe just a little over halfway to two-thirds of the way to having that project getting completed. It's going to take several more years to get done. But we have my friend, Dr. David Trim, at the General Conference Archives, Statistics and Research Office, who's the lead on this project, Dragoslava Sontrak. So if you want a deep dive and find some and just geek out on Adventist history, make sure you check out the encyclopedia, encyclopedia.adventist.org. And you can read the biographies of each of them, because I've written most of them now, at least on this group of missionaries to Seleucia. But sometimes missions goes in bursts and fits, and sometimes forward and sometimes a little bit backwards. But I want to tell you some stories about how Adventism not only went to Africa, but how Adventism also went to Asia. And our first Adventist mission station going westward across the Pacific, do you remember? Where was it again? Hawaii. Yeah, the Sandwich Islands, the Royal Hawaiian Kingdom. And one of our very first ship missionaries, they called him, was Abram LaRue. Now, Abram LaRue, kind of an interesting character, grew up in New Jersey and then went westward when there was the gold rush. And he was one of those who was fortunate enough to get one of those claims and struck it rich. Fabulously wealthy, goes to San Francisco, buys a bunch of buildings, is set for life. He is a multimillionaire by today's standards. And then suddenly there's one of those fires that sweeps through the city. And he loses everything. Traumatized. He goes up into the hills and becomes a shepherd. He says, I just don't want to even see anybody. I lost everything. In fact, even his own family dies from a 19th century epidemic. He even loses his family. He's the only one that survives. He's lost all family. It's like Job, and so he's up there in the mountains, and one day he's taking his sheep around. He's just a shepherd now, and he stops by a friend's house, and a colporteur had stopped in there, and the person, feeling sorry for them, had bought one of our early Adventist publications. I think it was Signs of the Times, okay? It's an evangelistic newspaper, but they didn't want it to read it. They wanted it because they needed some wallpaper. Well, they've got some interesting stuff on the wall. So he's starting to have his own Bible study, reading articles from the newspaper plastered to the wall. And then the one lady, her husband comes home. Don't tell my husband, he doesn't like religion or whatever. And eventually, but he says, where'd you get this stuff from? If they ever come back up here again, I would like to meet them. I'd like some more of this literature. And eventually they do come back. He has Bible studies he will become converted. He has this incredible just talk about, from just one of the most unusual stories I've ever run across in Adventist history. And so he will go from there. He says, well, I've got lots of friends. I've sailed the world. I have contacts. He goes back to San Francisco, meets one of his friends, says, hey, I'm going to Honolulu. Why don't you come with me? And so he takes another one of his friends. And so this is the first evangelistic meeting being held in Hawaii. So this is our first westward, the Adventist message going westward across the Pacific. And this is kind of neat. I found this in the archives. And that's Abram LaRue in the picture, by the way, that this is the first Adventist mission station in Honolulu. So if any of you go on a vacation to Hawaii, make sure you go see your Adventist heritage sites. It's actually really close to the royal the palace, the royal palace that's right there in downtown Honolulu. We know where the location of it was. And so then he will write to General Conference leaders and said, I want to go be a missionary. And they said, but you're old. I know, way to break a guy's heart, huh? And he's like, but I'm all in, and they said, well, we don't have any money, but we can't stop you. So our recommendation is that if you go to some island in the Pacific, now remember, he's already on an island, right? If you go to stay on an island in the Pacific, he says, well, my dream is to go to China. And then as he's thinking and praying about it, as he gets the General Conference's letter in response, and at first feels a little bit disappointed, he was a rather clever fellow. He remembered, wait a minute, right off the coast of China is Hong Kong, which is an island. So I can fulfill the technical requirements of the church leadership and what they asked me to do, and I can still go to China. And so he does. He finds one of his friends who is a ship captain. He says, well, I'm sailing to Hong Kong. Come with me. You can come with me for free. And so he will go ahead and start the first Adventist self-supporting mission station in the island of Hong Kong. Now, it's kind of crazy. I've done a lot of research on this. I've even gone to find where it was in Hong Kong because I just can't help myself, okay? So, sometimes when people travel, you try to travel, and I look for the longest layovers in places I want to go find Adventist heritage sites, okay? So it's a thing. I'm sorry. I can't help myself. But I had a chance to go to Hong Kong. I'll tell you, I went to go find some of this stuff. And so he gets there, and actually what he does to support himself, do you know how he supports himself? Well, of course, he'll have literature, but most of that he's giving away to people. He sells dried fruits and nuts. Pretty cool, huh? And so he's being creative. He's helping to support himself. People need to have dried fruits and nuts. So he has a little shop and has a little apartment up above, and then he starts befriending some of the people coming to and fro. And in fact, this is absolutely nuts. But because there's a British colony, there was a British man of war that had gone across the Pacific Ocean, and there was a young man who got a piece of literature that had been sent to England, ended up on a boat, started studying it. He's studying his Bible. He's convicted Jesus is coming. He's convicted he should start keeping the Sabbath. He's like, I don't know if there's anybody that can help me understand this better. He's studying this all the way across. In fact, he's showing some of his other shipmates. He says, why don't you have a Bible study too with me? And so he's actually leads like 3 or 4 other people that want to know more. And so guess where they land? Hong Kong. And guess who they bump into when they land? Abram LaRue. And so they start having church together. They start sharing their faith with others. They start translating some early tracts into Mandarin, trying to share their faith. And they send word back to church headquarters, please send us a pastor, send us an official missionary who can come and help to organize us, who can have some baptisms. And by the time Jacob Anderson, his wife Emma, and his sister Ida, and their small little son that came with them, by the time they arrived, there was a whole group of them, and they had the very first baptism to take place of by Seventh-day Adventists in Asia. It was a remarkable, remarkable occasion. By the way, if you're like me and you like to visit cemeteries, anybody else like to visit cemeteries? Awesome, you're like my people here. All right, yeah, we go on vacation and like, oh my goodness, there's another grave. And then my kids are like, Dad, really? Really? And then you know what's really cool? Some friends of mine showed me there's this like cemetery gravestone repair, like it's a special solution so that if there's too much lichen and some of this other stuff, so I keep a jug of that in my car. So whenever, you never know when you're going to stop in a cemetery and need to clean a tombstone, okay? And so I keep it with me everywhere I go, you know, and with a nice big brush, and so I mean, it's my way to try to do something, you know. Anyway, sorry, this is like confession time. But if you visit Hong Kong, okay, just in case, and you get a chance to have a layover, it's only like about an hour from the airport. You know, it's kind of congested in Hong Kong if you didn't know that. But here's his grave. It's still there. They call it the Happy Valley Cemetery, okay? So if you get a chance, check it out. Pretty cool. That's a couple of my colleagues at IS there standing in front of Abram LaRue's grave, and right around them are also some of the other early missionaries like Ida Thompson and Gertrude Green, who we have biographies on them in the Adventist Book Center. You want to hear some inspirational stories of women? Oh my goodness! I just wish I could go on all day just telling you stories of some of these characters and how God opened doors, and through perseverance and through the most unlikely of odds, how the Holy Spirit providentially worked. And here's the picture of the very first evangelistic meeting tent in China. Check this out. And I love this. This is so amazing. And then once Jacob Anderson and his family, they have this baptism, they write back and say, there's a lot of people interested in the Adventist message. In fact, there was another missionary from another church who read and had studied about Adventism, had gone home on furlough, picked up some literature, came back to China, started to keep the Sabbath on mainland China. And so they said, wait a minute, we have some missionaries in Hong Kong. Why don't you guys meet up? And so they will then travel to mainland China several days and weeks, actually, I think, and they will go and meet up, and they will organize the first Adventist church. So they write back, we need more missionaries, and we need not just pastors, but we need medical workers. And here's a picture of our first mission station on mainland China, and you may not recognize that person, but that is Harry Miller, and this is a picture that he saved and talked about for many, many years later, because that is where they had the very first printing press in Asia, and they talked about how it was sometimes blisteringly cold. Their hands they had to keep moving their hands so that they could just keep working in the wintertime. In the summertime, it was so blisteringly hot. And they began to share the Adventist message. And sometimes I think we don't understand the level of sacrifice. So Harry Miller, his wife, Maud, they're both physicians, incredibly talented. The first year that they were there in China, she caught I forget what she caught. I think it was the yellow fever. Anyways, I'd have to go back and look in my notes, but she died of some terrible disease, and he had to bury her just outside the city wall of that small village where they had the first Adventist press. And you can just sense the incredible sacrifice, and what she was worried about is to tell her husband, don't give up. Whatever you do, don't give up. Don't be discouraged. But remain faithful to Jesus. Remain faithful to Jesus. And so there's a small group of missionaries there that with Maud and Harry and others, I found some pictures in the archives. This is kind of cool. This is a picture of that street where the printing press was. This was an old glass lantern slide that was unidentified, and I looked at it and said, I knew right away what that was. That's the picture with early colporteurs taking that literature from that press that then would go out and be distributed far and wide to many different people. And I love this picture of the pole, the bamboo pole, with them carrying both their bedding on one side and Adventist literature on the other side. Here's another picture of one of there in front of the printing press. And I just love that. That's, again, that same little house that they reconfigured, and they sacrificed so much. In fact, nobody wanted to rent to them at first. They said that the missionaries, the foreign missionaries, they like to eat children. And so they had to overcome that prejudice. They had to overcome that prejudice by showing them love and grace and ministering to them, especially through medical ministry, which was probably the most effective way of breaking down those racial prejudices. And this is one of my favorite pictures. This is from 1907, so this is only 5 years after the Andersons arrived there in China. This is the first meeting where they gathered all the missionaries together. Now, I've sat and looked at this picture probably for 100 hours, looking at every single face. I've now been able to identify every single person, including every single child in there. Someday I'm going to write a book on the beginnings of Adventism in China, and I think I'll use this picture as my focal point because every single one of those people in that picture has an incredible story. Stories of providence, stories, single one of those people in that picture is that they all said the same refrain, that the ship ride across the Pacific Ocean was so terrible that nobody wanted to go back. It was a one-way trip. And so we get so spoiled today when we're on an airplane going to the farthest ends of the planet. And so medical missionary work was one of the main ways that they were able to break down prejudices. Here's one of our early medical clinics. This one's in Yangchang. And here is another picture of Harry Miller. I wanted you to see this because this is kind of a neat story. Harry Miller would go on. He'd get remarried and make some incredible contributions of his own, not least of which is soy milk. You can thank Harry Miller and our Adventist missionaries for soy milk. Any fans of soy milk here today? Of course, now we have all kinds of rice milk and oat milk. Someone got me going on pea milk, like legumes, peas. Sounds really weird, but they have all kinds of milk. But soy milk, some nice alternatives. I like some of those milks myself too. Have them in my cereal. Anyways, but God would bless in incredible ways, and I want to tell you two stories before I close of how God worked in China in some really in the most unexpected of ways. Now, if you go to China today, there is, if you visit, anybody visit China before? Just curious, a couple of you have? Okay. We love visiting China. In fact, my kids, I would take them always on one trip per year that they could come along with Dad for some speaking appointment or something. And so my daughter had very good taste. She would always come with me to Europe. So whenever, Dad, I want to see some castles. I want to see this. And then one time she came with me on an African safari when I went to teach some classes in Kenya. But my son, he didn't care anywhere else in the world. The only place he wanted to go was China. So every time I went to China, which is at least once a year, he was coming with Dad. And you can go to ancient city walls, lots of fun things. The story I'm going to tell you about is a story that takes place. By the way, I forgot to tell you, this is the city gates in Nanjing, which I've been to, and it's really quite impressive. Huge ancient city gates. And by today, you can take a train or you can even drive. It takes maybe about an hour outside of Shanghai. And if you've ever seen the book Yankee on the Yangtze, this is the story that is recounted there. But I've done some interviews and tracking down from family members, and most recently some declassified materials from the State Department. That this is the fun of doing research, is sometimes you can get access to and request materials to be declassified after enough time. And so I found, I had a friend that works in the State Department said, oh, well, you really like this history. I have a friend that does mission history in China that works in one of the State Department archives. She could probably help you find some stuff. So this is where, if you haven't been to Nanking or Nanjing, this is where you can see the Yangtze River, one of the largest rivers in China, or sometimes referred to as the Yellow River. You can see it's a source of life. It's a source of transportation. So much depends upon the river. And this is a picture of what it looked like about 1925. So this is about 20 years after our first missionaries came to China. Now, just to get an idea why this place is so important. It's not only on the river, but it's to this day, it's one of the largest university towns in China. Lots of universities, lots of commerce. It's a very strategically important city. And for missionaries, it was important because this was the #1 place where they had language schools. So if you wanted to come to China and learn Mandarin or learn Chinese, this was where you went. So we had a mission station established there just for training missionaries how to learn the language. And this is kind of fun here. This is a picture of how big this is. Now, the walls of the city are so big that you could drive 2 cars and not even come close, and you could very comfortably drive them all the way around the top of the walls, all the way around the city. It's about 30 miles long, the city walls going around the city. Huge, huge city walls that are usually about 100 feet high. I know because I've seen them. And here is a picture of the Language Institute. This is where a lot of foreigners, people that would work for governments, people that worked in, for example, in the State Department. And I found in the archives a picture of the mission compound. Now this is kind of cool because I found these in some old glass lantern slides, and someone was about to throw them away. And they said, Dr. Campbell, would you like these? Because otherwise, if you don't come and get them, we're going to toss them. Which always breaks a historian's heart. Don't throw old stuff away unless you know what it is, because it could be very important. And anyway, so just that's my word to the wise. Please, 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 my historian's heart pleads with you to look out for those old historical records and whatever you might have in your churches. And if you have such stuff, let me know. I'd love to partner with you to make sure that it gets preserved and taken and cared for. Anyways, here's another picture in one of those slides of the early mission station there. They wanted missionaries to live. They discovered if they do that, they need to have clean homes and good food. And it really helps to be effective as a missionary if you know the language. And the head of the mission station was Pastor, this is really his name, Doolittle. That was his name, Pastor and Mrs. Doolittle. You've heard stories about him? Well, I'm going to tell you one right now, because here he is with all those missionaries. That's a picture. And about the time, soon after he arrived there, and some of the missionaries that were arriving in a new cohort to learn the Chinese language, they arrived. War broke out between the tribes, between the government in the north and those tribes in the south. And pretty soon, troops were marching in to town. Now, when war breaks out, what do? Usually it's a good idea to leave. And they didn't want to leave because they didn't want to send the message that Adventist missionaries are scaredy cats, that they just run and leave as soon as there's problems. And so they said, well, we don't think that's a good idea, until the American ambassador who was stationed there personally visited the mission station, says, I think it would be a very good idea if you left. So the next day, they loaded up all the women and children, said, well, we're still not scaredy cats. We're going to stay here. And this is an actual picture. This is from the State Department archives now of them being evacuated. Kind of interesting. And this is the ship to which they were evacuated. Kind of interesting. And then I found one of the little children that were in that picture that I showed you a little while ago, and tracked down their family, and they had a photo album, and they had pictures of them being evacuated onto the boat. Now, I don't have enough time to show you. I've actually found quite a few more pictures of them in the evacuation process, and they're on the ships. So now the women and children are on the boats in the middle of the Yellow River, the Yangtze River, and the missionary men are all back left on the mission compound, which kind of created a kind of an interesting situation. What's going to happen next? And then suddenly, war broke out over the city. There was bombs and all kinds of things going on over the city as they could see the bombs and explosions and gunfire and bullets ringing through the air. And the missionary men started to think, maybe we made a mistake, because they said it really looks like 4th of July. Really pretty until you realize those are real bullets and real bombs that are going off. And then the next morning, the new troops from the other side had beaten the troops from the north, and they invaded the city. They said, well, great, the war is over. These troops from the south, they were told, would be friendly to foreigners. They will be friendly to them. They will be safe. They have no interest in their business. And so they're so excited to see the troops that the missionaries naively run to the front of the mission compound, and there's a mission wall with the entrance there and a little guard station, right, with the gate to go out. And they go out and they see they see the troops going by, and they say, "Come on in." They're waving at them. "We're over here." And then the troops took their muskets, their guns, and aimed it at the missionaries. And in between them and the missionaries, and we found a picture of him, was the guard. Now, the story of the guard is very interesting because he had become a Christian because he was one of those, they called them coolies. That meant that you're one of those rickshaw drivers that you'd pull people from behind, you know. And he was a coolie, and Pastor Doolittle had needed to go on an errand. It was customary at that time. You pay somebody a little bit of money, and they'll pull you in the little rickshaw kind of thing to go get something. And this particular coolie had gotten his business, but he began to fall down. He broke down because he was so sick. And Pastor Doolittle took the coolie cart, put him in, and then he pulled the cart and got him some medicine and got him some help. He said, "Wow, what kind of missionary is this that he's willing to pull the cart and get me medicine?" And so he came, was converted, and said, "I will work for you," and became the guard there at the mission station. And at that particular moment, he jumped between the guards and the missionaries and said, "Don't shoot." And he took the bullets for those missionaries. He died, as those missionaries gave them just long enough to turn around and escape. Where did they run to? They ran behind the mission, which was a graveyard, a cemetery, and then a bamboo forest, and they started running for their lives to the ambassador's residence. Now we've got missionaries on the run. The problem was there's all these troops, and now they know that they're hostile, are marching on the road in front of the ambassador's residence. How do they get across the road? So they're hiding on one side of the road, and they have a friend who's with them. Another person that was friendly to them that had seen them running came alongside, said, "How can I help you? How can I help you?" They said, "Just take this note to the ambassador. Let him know that we're waiting and trapped on the other side of the road." So he takes the note across the road to the ambassador, passes it to one of the guards. There were Marines, U.S. Marines, guarding the ambassador. And they're waiting and hiding, and suddenly they've been found out. Some troops actually see them hiding, and so the guards start to, the enemy troops start to raise their rifles and muskets at these missionaries to destroy them, to take them out. And right at that moment, the ambassador had received the note, had run downstairs, and had opened the gate himself, told the Marines, give them cover as they ran across the street. And as people were shooting at them, they just barely made it across the street into the ambassador's residence. Here's the ambassador's residence. The ambassador said, "We've evacuated everybody. You guys are the last missionaries here. They've already destroyed other ambassadors' homes. They've already killed other foreigners. Our chances of survival are very low." And so he says, "We have to evacuate." And so he said that the ambassador had his two little children. He gave them to the missionary, said, "You guys hold their hands," as the Marines took up the rear, and as they were shooting at them, would give them covering fire to try to escape, to try to get to the wall. Now, you remember how high that wall was that I told you about. Usually it's about 100 feet high. They get to a safe spot, and they're finally able to get far enough away that they're able to no longer take any more enemy fire at them, and they begin to pray, "God, please save us. God, please give us wisdom." And they hide out in a home that was next to the wall on the corner closest to the river. And unfortunately for them, while they were in the house trying to devise a way to get the wall, a mob of these soldiers figured out where they had gone to and then began to attack them. So then they signaled down to the ships, "Please provide us cover." They gave the little special signals, and the ships, and these are pictures from the ships from when they were actually firing to save the missionaries. This is from the State Department archives here. Began to provide the covering fire, and they were able to scale down the wall. They said that what they did is in the house was a bunch of sheets. They tied the sheets together, They lowered themselves down the wall, one by one, the 100 feet down the wall. He said people had been shooting at them the whole time, but somehow God had providentially intervened. God had spared their lives. God had protected them. Here's some of the ships providing some of the shells, providing that cover. And then here's the city wall close to where they, from the top, where they were able to descend from it on that rope, that sheet-made rope that they lowered themselves. Here is what it actually looked like. And you can see here's the wall where they escaped down. They said everybody made it down safely to the bottom except the very last Marine, who was apparently quite pudgy and broke the rope. The last 20 feet, he fell to the ground, broke his leg, but he lived to tell the story. God had intervened. God had spared their lives against the greatest of all the odds. God was at work. God had saved them once again. Well, my time's out for today, I think. My second story from China, I'll try to tell it to you tomorrow. I've just had so much fun telling you stories this week. But I hope that you've sensed and heard that God's voice speaking through the lives of those who've gone before, our missionary forebears, and that same voice that calls us to share Jesus is the same voice that is calling us here today to do the very same thing as well. The same God that protected missionaries in China is the same God that will take care of us wherever we may go. And there may be missionary sacrifices that are on the way, but God calls us to do our very best, to pay heed, pay attention, and to somehow, just like that silly little French fry hot dog, to listen to God's voice speaking to us today. Let's pray together. Father God, thank you so much for these stories of how Adventism grew across Africa, across China, to the farthest ends of the earth, and how people had to even devise clever ways going to places like Hong Kong to fulfill various requirements. But in the end, that you were still providentially opening doors and making it possible for your message to spread. And so, Lord, whatever time that we have left, may we faithfully heed the call to invite others to be a part of your everlasting kingdom is my prayer in the loving name of Jesus. Amen. Before I go, last but not least, don't forget tomorrow, Dr. Indy, my good buddy, is helping me out because I have a flight to catch, so he and I are swapping. So Adventist History Stories, Mission Stories is 2 o'clock, Sanctuary with Dr. Indy is at 3 o'clock, and I'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you so much.